It gives me great pleasure to introduce a friend of mine. He's a member of the House of Representatives from New York, Congressman Vito Fossella, who will introduce our next panel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and distinguished senators. I appreciate the opportunity to come to introduce to you two great individuals, two friends, and indeed two great New Yorkers. One has dedicated much of his life to the public sector, serving as a New York City police officer, and then making the transition to the private sector successfully, and then back to the public sector, where he has served with distinction in the New York City Council in the Bay Ridge, Dyker Heights section of Brooklyn, and now as a New York State Senator. His name is Marty Golden. The other has a reputation, and a good reputation at that, for being a successful, urbane, businessman, but above all, he's I think, a great American and a great New Yorker. And the one thing that both Donald Trump and Senator Marty Golden have in common is that they believe in New York City. They believe it's the greatest city in the world, and they are great Americans. And in this case, they believe that, and they share my view, that the United Nations can play a positive role in this world, and it should remain in New York City, but it also has an obligation to the United States taxpayer to be accountable, transparent, and when it does what it does, it should do so with the highest degree of responsibility to all of us. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank all of you for convening this very important hearing, for shedding light on what I think is an important matter, not just in New York, but across the country. And allow me to introduce to you my good friends, Marty Golden and Donald Trump. Thank you.
For our audience, State Senator Marty Golden is a conservative and independent and Republican representing Southwest Brooklyn, was first elected on November 5th, 2002, and was reelected to the New York State Senate on November 2nd, 2004. Mr. Trump is a world-renowned real estate developer, entrepreneur, author, now television producer and star of the reality show, The Apprentice. You know, there's something I want to say here, but I dare not say it. State Senator Golden, if you would, keep your remarks to 5 minutes. We have read your testimony, appreciate your heart. I would also remind, our whole purpose is about what the UN's doing with this building. All of us have some strong feelings about the UN, but I would like for us to focus our attention on the process here of what we're directing to, and not all the other problems that we all are aware of at the UN.
Thank you, Mr.
Please
Chairman.
begin.
And thank you for this opportunity to speak before you, Chairman, Senator Sessions, Senator Dayton. Thank you. Also, part of the subcommittee and invited guest. I am the New York State Senator Martin J. Golden from Brooklyn, and on behalf of the State Senate Majority and Senator Joseph Bruno, Majority Leader, I want to thank you for this opportunity here to testify and explain to the subcommittee members my efforts to put a stop to a crucial piece of the New York State Legislature necessary for the United Nations planned renovation and expansion. Typically, a New York State Senator rarely engages in issues of international organizations. But late in fall of 2004, it was brought to my attention that a bill was poised for passage in the New York State Senate, which would eliminate a children's playground adjacent to the United Nations and a swap for another site, thereby allowing the United Nations an expansion project to move forward. Land swap deals that improve public space and fairly commonplace in New York State because they have community support, and in some instances, municipalities are required to get approval for that legislation. Supporters of that bill believe that and continue viability of the United Nations site is important to the city of New York, the state, and to the world community. The intent of the bill is to foster an appropriate planning process with due deference and need to the local community for parks and historic preservation. I agree with the continued vitality of the United Nations site is important to the city of New York, the state, and to the world community. But I objected to rewarding the United Nations with taxpayer dollars and the privilege of expanding in New York because of its mismanaged and deeply troubled organization. United Nations leadership is responsible for the organizational mismanagement and for the blame falls squarely on the shoulders of Secretary General Kofi Annan and his failure to implement a standard of accountability and transparency. And you've heard that here today on several of the people that have testified. Everything just seems to be in a mismatch. There is nothing that has been vetted. Everything seems to be out there. Nobody seems to be able to pinpoint a dollar figure. And you've pointed it out very well, Senator Colburn. This is going to impact our children for many, many years to come. Under Mr. Annan's, under Kofi Annan's tenure, he presided over the shameful Oil for Food program in what appears to be the largest dollar-for-dollar humanitarian scandal in world history. I simply could not trust the United Nations under Kofi Annan's leadership with taxpayer dollars and will not support this legislation to allow the privilege of expanding the United Nations in New York. I believe that Mr. Kofi Annan's office should have been more forthcoming in the inquiries of the Senate sessions, Senator Sessions and Senator Coleman, and you, sir, Senator Colburn, as well as the inquiries for other senators about the United Nations renovation and the expansion project. Senator Sessions' inquiries were for the benefit of the American taxpayer who is responsible for the proposed $1.2 billion loan and yearly operating cost. And it is your hearing here today, Senator Colburn, that will also bring out the cost. And a lot of people don't understand is what this country puts into it. The 2006 operating dollars for the UN is $469 million. And we put in $1.2 billion in humanitarian relief. $1.5 to $1.6 billion to go to $2 billion annually. That's what this country, what the taxpayers put into this. Ultimately, this stonewalling is indicative of mismanagement and a potential for the United Nations to waste millions of taxpayer dollars on this renovation and expansion plans. The world's premier developer, Mr. Donald Trump, estimates that the world body stands to waste hundreds of millions of dollars due to incompetency and theft. I value Mr. Trump's opinion and share his concerns. When I first expressed my opposition to the United Nations expansion, Secretary General Kofi Annan probably had no idea where Bay Ridge, Brooklyn was, and for what that matter, who I was. He had no idea how seriously I take my oath of office to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the state of New York. Yet this issue has brought me here today before the subcommittee because expanding the United Nations under Kofi Annan's leadership is not reflective of New York's diverse population, which is represented by a majority of state senators with conservative values. Some New York state senators have objections based on terrorism concerns, like Senator Michael Balboni of Long Island, who pointed out that the plan to upgrade the United Nations involves putting a 35-story building on top of what is listed as a major terrorist target, the Queens Midtown Tunnel. Every driver going through there would be burdened by whatever security precautions are put into place. Over 80,000 vehicles pass through that Queens Midtown Tunnel daily. Restricting use of the tunnel is not just an inconvenience, but also an economic hardship. Other state senators, such as Senator Surf Maltese of Queens, had deep philosophical objections towards the United Nations because of its anti-Americanism, its anti-Semitism, human rights violations by United Nations staffers, unpaid parking tickets, and many other issues. And the issue of which we all agree upon in this room today is the scandalous United Nations Oil for Food program. $60 billion, billions wasted, gone, corruption. My opposition and the amount of the negative publicity associated with getting this bill passed in the New York State Senate set off an intense lobbying effort. Despite intense lobbying efforts, I told the people supporting New York State Senate passage of the legislation that my request is simple. Kofi Annan must resign and the standard of accountability and transparency be instituted before I will support this bill. The resignation of Kofi Annan would be the beginning of a systematic change to the management and oversight of the United Nations. I understand that the United Nations generates tax revenues and adds to the international appeal of the city of New York. However, in my opinion, I firmly believe that the United Nations will remain in New York City despite my staunch opposition to state legislation. Kofi Annan's leadership, the use of taxpayer dollars, and my philosophical objections towards the United Nations will not stop the United Nations from staying here. In my heart, I know that I made the right decision for the people in my Senate district, the city, the state, the New York, and to the future children of this that are going to pay this debt here in America. The debt will just continue to mount. The money that this nation will put into the UN will continue to mount. We need an institution that is capable of managing itself. And we've heard testimony here today that tells you it can't manage a simple project of building a building in Manhattan. Why would we want to pour hundreds of millions and billions into that facility, into that organization, without accountability and transparency, and so it can be effective? Thank you, Senator Colburn, Senator Sessions, Senator Dayton.
Thank you, Senator Golden. Just a little housekeeping chore. I want to thank Mr. Burnham's staff for returning. I appreciate your willingness to listen to the other viewpoints. Now we would like to hear from you, Mr. Trump. We, first of all, appreciate that you would take time out of your schedule to come down here. I think it's an important area. We recognize your success in the very areas that we're talking about and look forward to hearing what you have to say about, number one, your opinions, but also what you've heard here today.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. It's a great honor to have been invited, and if I can lend a hand, I would certainly love to do so. I have to start by saying I'm a big fan, a very big fan of the United Nations and all it stands for. I can't speak as to what's been happening over the last number of years because it certainly hasn't been good. But the concept of the United Nations and the fact that the United Nations is in New York is very important to me and very important to the world as far as I am concerned. So I am a big fan, such a fan, in fact, that at great expense I built a building across the street. It's the tallest apartment house in the world. It's been a tremendously successful building, sold out, and I'm very proud of it. And if the United Nations weren't there, perhaps I wouldn't have built it in that location. So it means quite a bit to me. My involvement with the United Nations began with a letter which I will give to the committee from the ambassador to the United Nations from Sweden. And it's a long letter and a very beautifully written letter. And essentially, he read an article about the success of Trump World Tower, which is the building that I can show you right here. Which is, as you can see, very, very substantially taller than the United Nations, bigger than the United Nations. And he read an article in the New York Times saying that the building cost approximately $300 million to build. So he wrote me a letter and ultimately called me and said, is it possible that that building cost $300 million? Because it just seems so much bigger and so much better and so much more expensive and so much more luxurious. And how could you have done that for $300 million when at that time, Senator, they were talking about $1.5 billion to renovate the United Nations, and this was around December of 2000. And I said, well, there's only two reasons, either gross incompetence or something far worse than that. And you know what the something is, and that's corruption. Because there's absolutely no way that that building could have cost $1.5 billion to build. And I did a chart, and I looked at other buildings, and I heard the numbers today, and I'm very impressed with Mr. Burnham, but Mr. Burnham, it's not his business. Mr. Burnham is in a different business. And the man he hired, who has done some work, I guess, has just been on the payroll for 2 days, so perhaps he'll be a great genius and he'll bring down the cost to what it should be, which I think is about $700 million tops, and that's complete. But I did a little chart, and I looked at buildings that were comparable that I built, and I looked at fees also, architectural fees. The architectural fee for this building, and you have to understand a residential luxury building is far more complex than an open floor office building to build. It's much more. You have many more bathrooms, you have many more kitchens, you have many more rooms. It's more complex. Office building is essentially open space with subdividers. So I looked at it and I added up some of my costs, and for Trump World Tower across the street, built not long ago, I spent approximately $258 a foot. It's tallest building, tallest residential building in the world. $258.32 a foot. I have 871,000 feet. It costs $225 million to build. Now, anybody that says that a building of renovation is more expensive than building a new building doesn't know the business, because you have a frame built, you have your foundations built, you have in many cases elevators that can be reutilized in their entirety but fixed. You have many, many components that can be used, and it only costs a fool more money. I did the Grand Hyatt Hotel from the old Commodore Hotel. I did Trump International Hotel and Tower from the old Gulf and Western building at 1 Central Park West, if you remember. I did the Trump Park Avenue building from the Delmonico Hotel. I love doing renovation because it costs you half. It doesn't cost you more, it costs you less, if you know what you're doing. Now, if you don't know what you're doing, it can be fraught with cost overruns, et cetera, et cetera. So I looked at a couple of other buildings. 40 Wall Street is a building which is unfortunately and sadly now the tallest building in downtown Manhattan, sadly because the World Trade Center came down. It replaced 40 Wall Street. It was actually the tallest building in the world for a period of 1 year, and then superseded by the Chrysler Building and then the Empire State Building. But downtown Manhattan, it was superseded by the World Trade Center. So 40 Wall Street's approximately 72 stories tall. It was a complete gut renovation, identical to what you're doing. We put all brand new windows, brand new everything in it. And I have a renovation cost of, let's say, $100 a foot if you add everything. And that would mean that your job would cost somewhere in the neighborhood of half the number that you're talking about, and even less. The way I look at it, the number that they're talking about, and I agree with Senator Sessions, is close to $600 or $700 a foot. They're not adding garages. And by the way, garages are very inexpensive to renovate, so that brings the number way down. They're not adding a lot of things that have to be added. When I went to see the administration and when I went to see Kofi Annan, I was actually quite excited because I thought that I could save this country, this world, everybody, including myself, a lot of money just by sitting down and having a meeting. Unfortunately, as our great senator to my right said, there was just no response. They didn't really care. It got a lot of press. I walked into the room and I sat down. I felt like a head of state. I was sitting with Kofi Annan, and a door opened, and there were literally hundreds of reporters taking my picture. I said, "What are we doing?" "I just want to tell you, I can build a building a lot cheaper." And that was the end of it. I wrote letters, and you have copies of the letters. I wrote letters after the meeting. I thought the meeting went amazingly well. I was expecting a call the following day from, whether it's Kofi Annan or his people. At that time, it was a man named Connors. I met with Mr. Connors. Mr. Connors didn't know the first thing about what he was doing. He didn't know whether or not the curtain wall was going to be new, old, and didn't even know what a curtain wall was. I said, "What are you going to be doing with the curtain wall?" He said, "What is a curtain wall?" Now, he was in charge of the project. The curtain wall is the skin of the building. I said, "Will it be new or old?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "Are you using New York steam or are you using a new boiler system?" He said, "I don't know what New York steam is. It's a very common form of heating in the building." He had no clue. And the price at that time was $1.5 billion. I mean, I don't know why it came down because the world has gone up, but it came down. That was in the year approximately 2000 to 2001. So he didn't have a clue. I don't know if he's still there. Perhaps he is. The one thing I found him very, very good at is that he didn't want to lose control of this project. He was a man that absolutely wanted to keep control of the project, but he didn't have even the slightest inkling of what it was all about, knew nothing about it. He then told me that he may move people out, he may not move people out. He didn't know. He thought he might. He wasn't sure. He just didn't know. So I went through a whole list of questions for him, and then I realized that the United Nations is in serious trouble because the $1.5 billion that they were talking about, there was no way it was going to happen for that. And I say today that the $1.2 billion, which they brought down, even though it's basically the same work, and even though things have gotten more expensive. So I don't know why they brought it down, because I don't think they brought it down for any particular reason. But the $1.2 billion, in my opinion, I'll be sitting here in 3 years, and I'll be saying, and I'm going to predict that it'll cost over $3 billion, because they just don't know. I was very impressed with Mr. Burnham, but again, you have to deal in New York City construction to see what tough people are all about, to see what tough contractors are all about. And if you haven't done it, you're going to go to school, and they're just going to take you to lunch, and you're just not going to even know what happened. So this project at $1.2 billion will cost, in my opinion, $3 billion. In my own opinion, however, in my real opinion, it should cost approximately $700 million. I've been listening to a couple of different things. Number one, swing space. I don't think you need swing space. First of all, what landlord in New York is going to rent space for a year and a half or 2 years? Who's going to do that? You're going to give up a building for a year and a half or 2 years and say, oh, good, you just go in, mess up my building for a short term, and then move out. Nobody's going to do that unless they're totally desperate. And you don't have to be desperate in New York. It's the hottest real estate market in the world today, probably. And I'm saying, where are they going to find this space to start off with? It's going to be a disaster. And if you know New York City landlords, and some of you do, there is no worse human being on earth, okay? They are going to have more fun with these folks from the United Nations when it comes to signing that lease. And the United Nations, their heads will be spinning. Assuming there's honesty, their heads will be spinning. So I don't know where they're going to get the space. They're going to have to pay so much. And no landlord's going to fix the space. I mean, you know, I'm listening to these people that are very naive, and I respect them, but they're very naive in this world. Now, I might be naive in their world, but in this world, they're naive. To think that they're going to go into a building and rent hundreds and hundreds of thousands of feet of space, if they can find such a building, and I don't know of any building like that, and then they're not going to have to pay for the renovation of that space and fixing up the space for a couple of years. Now, people do that, but they sign 25 and 30-year leases. I don't mind going into an office building and fixing up space, but I sign a 30-year lease or a 20-year lease or at least a 15-year lease. These people are going to sign a 1 or a 2-year lease. It's ridiculous. So the concept of swing space, in my opinion, doesn't work from an economic, and the number of $98 million is a joke, because that number will be hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in just the renovation cost alone. One of the things that I had mentioned to Kofi Annan and the whole group when I was at the meeting was that there is no reason to move anybody out. In New York City, we have a lot of asbestos buildings, and there's a whole debate about asbestos. I mean, a lot of people could say that if the World Trade Center had asbestos, it wouldn't have burned down, it wouldn't have melted, okay? A lot of people think asbestos, a lot of people in my industry think asbestos is the greatest fireproofing material ever made. And I can tell you that I've seen tests of asbestos versus the new material that's being used, and it's not even it's like a heavyweight champion against a lightweight from high school. But in your great wisdom, you folks have said asbestos is a horrible material, so it has to be removed. Space is constantly being renovated. Asbestos is constantly being gotten rid of with tenants in possession. You sit there, they wrap it, they conceal it, they do it. Many professional firms, they move the asbestos. Estee Lauder's company, they did it while they were in possession. I could name 100 tenants where it's been done while they sit in their offices, literally working. Sometimes it's done over weekends. Sometimes it's done at a little different time. They take sections of offices and they do it, and the people move from that section to another section, and they're inconvenienced for a day and a half, and then they rebuild the office. So the concept of moving to swing space, dealing with New York City landlords, is absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Now, you can do the entire building. You can put new skin on the building. You can put see the piping, you don't have that much piping because the bathrooms are all centralized. You know, not every office has a bathroom. It's not like an apartment house. But you can do this entire building like I did the Grand Hyatt Hotel. I took the old Commodore Hotel and I made it into the Grand Hyatt Hotel on 42nd Street and Park Avenue. It was a great success. I did it with many buildings. I've done this with many buildings. But it's not necessary to have everybody leave the building in order to rebuild a building. And you don't have to necessarily even do it at one floor at a time. You can either fix the skin or put a new skin on the building. And what you do is you do the roof first and you seal it and you get a 30-year guarantee. You then bring, and what I do best in life is build. Even better than The Apprentice, I must say. The thing I do best is build. But you put a new roof, as I did with the Commodore Hotel into the Grand Hyatt. You put a brand new 20 or 30-year roof that's a guaranteed roof. And now your roof is done, like an umbrella. And then you bring the skin down, and as you're bringing the skin down, you're taking the old skin off. So by the time, and you literally have very little gap, very little space, but you're bringing the new skin down, and it's just, think of an umbrella. You bring in the brand, and you should put new skin. This skin has been up there for many 60 years. It's over. Now, you can copy the skin identically. You can copy the color of the glass identically. You can bring in all the modern technology, including triple pane or double pane glass in terms of heat and cooling and everything else. But you bring the skin down, and as you have scaffold, and as it's coming down, the old skin is coming off. Everything sealed up beautifully. In the meantime, inside, your pipes are going up, your asbestos is coming out, your electric is being redone. You have companies that do nothing but redo electric. Now, these are different companies. You have companies that do new electric, they wouldn't know how to redo electric. Then you have companies that redo electric, they don't know how to do new electric. I mean, it's just a specialty. But you have special people that redo apartments, which are being renovated all the time with people in possession, that redo all sorts of buildings. I just built a building on Park Avenue and 59th Street. I had tenants in possession when I did it. I mean, I built a major building, essentially brand new, the old Delmonico Hotel, and I had people living in the building when I did a major $100 million job. It's a $200 million building. So the concept of moving to another location and getting everybody out of this building is absolutely asinine and will cost you so much money you're not even going to believe it, and then you're going to have to move in. Many other things. When I did the Wollman Rink, the city of New York was boggled down for a period of 7 years. They had spent $21 million. It was a tremendous embarrassment to the Koch administration, and I said, I'd like to take over the project. And they said, the New York Times came out with an editorial, the New York Post came out with a great editorial, and they said, let Trump do it. And finally, the city had let me do it. And I rebuilt, and believe me, I used nothing that was there before. Everything had to be gutted out because it was totally incompetently done. 7 years, $21 million. I redid it, and the senator remembers this very well, I guess. I redid it in 3 months for $1.8 million, and it opened, and I still run it today, and that was quite a while ago. This is no different, and in fact, in a certain way, this is even easier. All week long, you have tenants in New York renovating their space. You have buildings being renovated with what we call tenants in possession. I mean, they're tenants in possession. They're in possession of the space. Now, I listened to one thing, and I've seen one thing and one number that sticks out more than all of the rest. Because whether or not somebody doesn't know what New York steam is or what boilers are and whether or not they have boiler rooms, which the people at the United Nations didn't do. But the number of $44 million for an architect is one of the great numbers in the history. In fact, I think this man is a genius, whoever he may be, wherever he may be in Italy. I think he is a great genius. I would like to meet him. He is without question the richest architect in the world. And I listened as one person said, I think they only got 500,000. Another person said, I think they got $1 million, and then changed their mind, and it was 7.8 million. And then I listened to Senator Sessions, who actually did his homework, said they got paid $27 million because you were able to check the books. So they got paid $27 million. They haven't done anything. They don't even have plans. Nobody even knows what they're building, and they got paid $27 million. Now, I have respect for a lot of people, and I have great respect for architects, but I'm going to give you an example. The tallest residential building in the world, my architect got paid approximately $1.5 million. This architect got $44 million. A building at 40 Wall Street, my architect got paid, believe me, peanuts, I think less than $1.5 million. In Chicago, where I'm building a building of 92 stories at the old Sun-Times site, 2.7 million square feet, which is more than the United Nations. If you add up all of the projects that they're talking about, it's larger, substantially larger. I'm spending $600 million, and they're saying they're going to spend $1.2 billion. So they're spending much more. And this is a 92-story building with brand new structure, brand new foundations. I'm building all the roads. Mayor Daley made me build roads around the building. I had no choice. Otherwise, if you know Mayor Daley, you're not going to build the building. And he's a great mayor, but he made me do that. So all of this is $600 million, and they're spending 1.2. Now, there's no way they're spending $1.2 billion, in my opinion, and based on what I've heard. When they've spent $27 million and terminated the architect, there's big trouble. Because I don't think they have a new architect. So if they don't have a new architect, who's going to do the plans? And who's going to do the bidding? Because in order to do a job, you have to have a complete set of plans and specs. If you don't have a complete, finished, over set of plans and specs, you have nothing to bid on. There's no way you can bid. The worst thing you can do, and you said you were in the home building business for a while, the worst thing you can do, as you know, is start a job without complete plans and specs, because the subcontractors will eat your lunch, right? So it's one of those things. So they don't even have an architect. They spent $27 million and they don't have an architect. Now, I have asked on numerous occasions to go in, and I would help them. I would love to help them. I don't want any money. I want nothing. I've made a lot of money. I don't care. I want nothing. There are lots of different, somebody said, what would be your dream on this site? Well, my dream is a dream that won't happen, but it's a dream that I might tell you. It's a dream to take the United Nations, the senator over here is probably going to go crazy, move it to the World Trade Center as a brand new United Nations, sell the United Nations site, which is one of the greatest sites in the world, for much more money than the whole thing would cost, and you end up building a free United Nations at the World Trade Center, where I don't think anybody's going to want to stay anyway. I think it's going to be a very, very hard rent-up at the World Trade Center. But let's assume that's not going to happen. Not a bad idea, though.
He's got no problem with it.
Not too bad. He's got no problem. And most people don't have it.
Kofi Annan on the top floor.
Okay, I won't get into it. I didn't say that. But the fact is that the United Nations building, with all of its buildings, with its parking, should be completed, and I mean completed, at a cost of $700 million. And it's my opinion that it will not be completed for less than $3 to $3.5 billion. They don't know what they're getting into. And please remember this, as somebody that's probably built as much as anybody my age anywhere, I don't know of anybody that's built more, if you don't have a complete set of plans and specifications, there is no way you can build. And from what I understand, they don't even have an architect. One final point. They give you some nice firms, Turner and this one and Theobald and Gardner and Theobald and all. The fact is that I can take those same firms and tell them the way I want it built, and those same firms will come up with prices that are half the price that they're coming up with. They're being told what to do by people that don't know what they're doing. So if I take Turner Construction, which is fine, or if I take a couple of others, and by the way, when I say fine, fine, but Rolls-Royce, they spend money. But if I take a couple of those firms, and if I show them the right way to do it, and if I lead them down the right way, which is really what a good developer does, that number that they're coming up with will be cut in half. So that's it. Congratulations. You've got yourself a mess on your hands. And it's only going to get worse.
Mr. Trump, thank you very much. Let me ask you a couple of questions. Your renovation cost per square foot on an average building, and let's say with asbestos decontamination, abatement, what is it, $100, $150?
I think any professional, I was speaking to somebody very professional, Richard Lefrak, before. He said he just gave out an architectural contract on a 1-million-foot building for $1.5 million, okay? Not $44 million, 1.5, so it's the same size, $1.5 million. I would say that if you, because of the United Nations in terms of security and some enhanced needs, okay, let's assume it's beyond even your normal high-grade office building, which it's really not. Essentially, it's an office building. But let's add something for security. I would think you should easily do it for $250 a foot, easily. And that means complete. That's not adding up all of this other stuff, which, by the way, was not given to you. You have many things listed on that board that weren't given to you.
Right, right. And when you say $250 a square foot, that's in today's dollars. So if we wait 2 years, number one, there's going to be some price inflation in that. And
they don't even have an architect, so how can they start sooner than that? First of all, to do a good set of plans and specs is going to take you a good year. So if you don't have an architect even hired yet because the last one ripped you off or did whatever he did, a guy is unbelievable. I mean, this guy, I want to meet him. I can learn from that guy. But so you have a man that got paid $27 million that you're not going to use. So now let's assume you have to start all over because no architect's going to take over somebody's plans in the middle of it. You just don't want to do that, okay? And the other thing is, how do you hire an architect from Italy? I love Italy. I love Italy. I love the Italians. How do you hire an Italian architect? What happens every time he wants to check the building, he gets on a plane and flies for 8.5 hours? Then he goes to the New York City Building Department and he doesn't even speak English. I mean, it's ridiculous. So what they have is they really have a problem. And I don't see how they can even start. Now, if you put a developer like myself or like any one of 5 other people, and I can only think of 5, in charge of a job like that, you could have that job started immediately. You could have the asbestos removed with tenants in possession. You could have the entire building rebuilt in less than 2 years. You know, Kofi Annan asked me one question. At the time, and I'm only increasing it because of the fact that when I met him, it was 4 years ago, but at the time I said I could do it, I think, for $400 million versus their $1.5 billion. Slightly different number, right? He said, what would be the difference in the building? I said, the difference would be my building would be better, be much newer, much richer. I was putting in all brand new marble floors on the ground. I like marble. I was putting in all brand new marble floors. They have all broken up terrazzo floors. Under their plan, they were leaving these all broken floors. They're broken, old, and terrazzo is not exactly a great material. It's garbage. But I was putting in all brand new marble. I was putting in an all new curtain wall. They were going to fix their curtain wall. If you fix that curtain wall, it's a disaster. You have to put in a brand new curtain wall. You'll get another 50 years. If you fix it, it's not the answer. It's going to leak. It's going to be a problem. So he asked me the question, and I said, the answer is it's going to be better. It will be brand new in its entirety. You won't have to move anybody out. You won't have to go and build. At that time, they were talking about, as you remember, building a new building to house the people, and they were going to put the building, and they were actually thinking about then ripping the building down. Okay, I said, that's a real beauty. But they don't know what they're doing, so here I am.
So if the United Nations decides to go ahead on the track that they're going now and go out for a $1.2 billion contract, you going to go get that business?
No, I'm not going to get it. First of all, they don't know what they want. They don't know what they have. They have no idea what they're doing. It's a problem where you can't bid on a job like that, and I wouldn't bid on it anyway. I offered my services free. I wanted to save close to $1 billion, actually $1.1 billion at the time. I wanted to save $1 billion for the United Nations, for the world in a sense. I wanted to do it. I like doing it. I like doing the Wollman Skating Rink. I mean, this is a bigger version of the Wollman Skating Rink. That's all it is to me. And I said, I don't want a fee. I don't want anything. They didn't like the idea. Now, the senator would have his own reasons. He's stronger on it than me. But they didn't want the idea. Are you surprised, Senator, about that?
No, I think that'd be a good location, and I did spoke in jest, and I apologize for the jest, but I think the downtown Manhattan would be a good site, or where it presently is, and I think you could do an outstanding job. Anybody could, as long as you have accountability and you have real transparency and you have real bids going on and real people managing these projects.
I think that's not going to happen. I think it's a very interesting idea, but I think it's not going to happen. I love the idea of the downtown switch, sell the land, you'll make such a fortune on the land, et cetera, et cetera. It's not going to happen from a practical standpoint. It should happen, but it's not going to happen. But just in terms of the renovation itself, you have to get the right architect. I mean, there are architects and there are architects. You have to get the right architect, and you have to know who those architects are. I mean, I can only think of 5 architects that would do a great job on this building. You have to know who the architects are. You have to get your plan started. You have to do it as a renovation, and the renovation should be done quickly, effectively. And in my opinion, by the end of 2007, this whole job should be complete. Complete. It can be started immediately because of the fact that you're doing it the way I'm saying. Within 3 to 4 months of planning, you can start your contracts without extras. In other words, you can start what I call hard contracts, contracts without fluff and without extras. I think the entire job can be done by the end of 2007. I promise you, Senator, they won't even have the people moved out by 2007.
One little follow-up. They gave us $1.2 billion, $482 million going to labor and materials, and $471 million set up for contingency and professional fees.
Nobody's ever heard of such a number.
In your experience, when you plan a project, what do you figure for a contingency fee? The whole thing, the cost overrun, right, liability, okay, the whole work. What do you figure?
Well, their contingency number was what, 400 and some odd million dollars?
Yeah, it's $471 million.
Craziest number I've ever heard. My building in Chicago is $600 million. I believe we have a $30 million contingency, so, and of 5%. The $30 million, if I use any more than 3 or 4, I'm going to be very angry at my people. That's a 92-story building. I have a $30 million contingency. And I don't expect to use it. I set aside $30 million. I expect that if I use more than $3 million, I'm going to be a very unhappy camper. To have a $400 and some odd million contingency is totally unheard of.
Thank you. Senator Dayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, you build good buildings, Mr. Trump.
Thank you.
I go in them. I go to Napoleon, so I
Very good.
go in them. And when can you start?
Well, I'd like to do, you know, it was amazing. The Swedish ambassador just piqued my attention, and he should get a lot of the credit for this. I mean, his letter is here. It's such a beautifully written letter, and it's written by a man of, I don't even know him. It's written by a man of great common sense.
And you met with the Secretary General 4 years ago?
4 years ago.
So, and I see here this United Nations General Assembly capital plan I referred to before is dated June of 2000.
Right.
So, I mean, this project now in 5 years
This project could
has
have been
gone
done.
nowhere.
Right. I
except
could
that
have built it twice.
Yeah.
I could have built it twice.
How does the United Nations, or how does, you know, whoever it is, the lender, if we're going to be the lender, how do you regain control of the project? Is it start with a developer?
Well, actually, Mr. Burnham said, I'd like to call you tomorrow, and I thought that was terrific. Honestly, I thought that was terrific. This is what I do. This is what I do the best. And I'm in New York, and as the senator said, Senator Sessions, New York is a tough place to do business. And, you know, I've had great success, and sometimes you take your lumps. You have to know the contractors. I know every contractor in New York. I know the ones that are going to, I'm not going to say the word, there's too many wonderful women in the room, but I know the contracts that are going to, quote, take advantage of you. I know the contracts that are slow, contractors. I know the contractors that are fabulous, that don't ask for extras. I know all of them. I know the good ones and the bad ones. I told a friend the other day who was doing his apartment, he told me the contractor. I said, don't use him. This was about a year ago. He got killed by this guy. He got killed. I said, use somebody else. He came to me the other day and said, I should have taken your advice. The United Nations people don't know. We have major slime in New York. And much of that is in the form of contractors. Isn't that a sad thing to say? And every one of them, I guarantee you, will find their way to the United Nations.
Well, when would you like to take over rebuilding the
I'll
visitor
help you
center
out.
and a few other projects?
That's true.
No, thank you.
You've had your own difficulties with,
We have,
with it. I know that.
but it shows what the difference between someone who knows what he's doing and people who don't. And thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Senator Sessions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very, very much for caring enough about the American taxpayers' money to have this hearing, and I think you've got 40-something planned. He is a fresh breath of fresh air for this Senate, and it ought to embarrass all of us because all of us have oversight committees that are not doing a very good job. And if we could save $1 million, Mr. Trump, that's $1 million that can be used for good causes, and I think there's potential to save a lot more than that. You have given us a tutorial on reconstruction and renovation and construction and big projects. I hope people were listening, and I think the main point is you've got to know what you're doing in this city in this kind of construction project, or you can be taken to the cleaners. Your contributions are going to help us save money, and I believe help us have a better UN building. And that's, you wouldn't have said that if you didn't believe in the institution and want it to be better and want it to have the best building it can and the best balance sheet it can. So I just want to thank you for it. And I will note that you said it could be completed by 2007. The plans are at this date to begin moving people out by June 2007. And so once again, we've got longer time frames and more cost. Again, I want to thank you for your courage, your willingness to speak out on an issue that a lot of people would have avoided, but you brought your expertise to bear and I believe will help the UN do a better job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Great honor.
Mr. Trump, if someone in your organization paid twice the amount for a project it cost, in 2 words or less, what would you say?
You're fired.
Mr. Chairman, we're dismissed.
Good job. Thank you. Thank you. Good job.
The season finale. Good job.
Tomorrow on Jim Smith, I would.
Would you do that, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll make sure it goes. Thank you.
Great job. Thank you.
Mr. Trump.
Hello, how are you?
Great job.
Anything I can do in to help.
Okay, absolutely.
I'll get that thing done so fast, so inexpensively. And it'll be, I'd love to do it, okay?
Yeah, we're not going to make it. That's good. I think this new guy, he can just start and he can. This may help him get started afresh.
Well, if you get me involved in that, I'll make sure I watch your money. I don't want anything, but I'll watch your money.
Looks like we don't have any. No questions?
Well, I thought the fact that he came over to me and was willing to listen was really very nice and very smart. And if he did call me, I would certainly want to help the United Nations and help these great gentlemen who are working so hard to really do something with the United Nations and, you know, to spend the money more wisely. They don't want to spend it on brick and mortar if they don't have to. If they can spend half of the money or 1/3 of the money, which is really what I'm saying, and then take $1 billion and focus on AIDS and problems and famine and all of the other things that they work on, I'm all for that, and they are all for that. Well, it was nothing much. I mean, I received a letter, and the letter was, well, we're looking into things, et cetera, et cetera. So I was a little disappointed, to put it mildly. I thought he was going to call and say, get over here. These guys would have called and said, be over here tomorrow morning at 7, not 8, 7. But I never heard from him. He wrote a letter. It was a very nice letter, but it was a tap dance.
I think, number one, there ought to be a complete stop until they've really looked at this. I think there's no question that this thing is a boondoggle in terms of cost, and it is going to cost more than $1.2 billion. I think the thing we heard today is they didn't know what it's going to cost, but they'd already decided on the $1.2 billion loan. I think that tells the Ronaldo thing, that he's no longer a contractor. That firm is no longer. Why? We should know that. And nobody knows exactly how much has been paid for it. So I think there's a lot of questions that the UN needs to say, time out, we'll start all over. Maybe we might learn something from one of the best developers in New York City.
I would just say that Mr. Trump made clear, and the answers or lack of them made clear, that they really don't know what they're doing. They don't have a clear vision of what they want to accomplish. Therefore, you can't make good plans and develop an efficient system to accomplish those plans. So I think that came out quite clear, and I do believe it's raised quite serious questions about cost, and I'm hoping that Mr. Burnham now, he's new on the job, he has an opportunity to start afresh. Maybe the impetus of this hearing will do so, and it would be good for the UN if it did.
Well, I think the more important thing is to develop a culture of transparency, not just at the United Nations. We're having trouble with that in our own government, and we got to do that. We owe that to our children and our grandchildren. You heard the ambassador say there's some things that she's willing to talk about, not an open record. We're going to take her up on that. We'll find out where that needs to go, and we'll work that area. This committee will not let go of this issue, period.
I would just point out that the UN office building in New York, and that's all it is an office building. The cost of that was extraordinary. It was more than the Boston courthouse, which was at the time considered the most expensive GSA project in the country. So I think the ambassador hopefully should keep an eye on that own building that they're in. I objected at the time, toured the building, and I thought that the costs were way above what was justified.
Are you making any efforts to block the U.S. government's motion that Senator Chance has to start a period
The Senate, by unanimous consent, did accept a limitation on the amount of the loan, requiring the Secretary of State to certify a need to go above that. That will go to conference. After this hearing, I'm not sure, maybe we ought to talk to the conferees about tightening that language up. So I think the Senate is concerned on a bipartisan basis about the cost of this. And one way to get some transparency would be to contain that loan. I would note the transparency really is a problem, since nobody could tell us how much has been paid for an architect, how much the contract said, which apparently is secret, how it was awarded, what the other bids were. And once again, making those processes transparent for the world will eliminate a lot of abuse and corruption.
I think that's it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Senator. Take care of yourself. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.